Hi, and welcome to the Modern Persian Food Podcast. We are food bloggers,
Bita Arabian,
and Bita Nazim Kelly, and we're here to share with you the rich flavors and fresh ingredients of Persian cooking and how to incorporate them into today's modern lifestyles.
We're excited to introduce you to the flavors, tastes, and techniques we use, and also our own cultural stories and perspectives growing up in the U.S. in a Persian family. Thank you for joining us. Hello. Hi, everyone. Welcome to episode number 71 of the Modern Persian Food Podcast. My co-host, Bita June, and I are feeling so honored to be joined today by a personal friend of mine and also a sort of distant relative, Dr. Mahtab Jafari. Hi, Mahtab June. How are you?
Hi, I'm doing well. Nice being here.
Thank you. So Dr. Mahtab comes with many credentials. She has a lot of credibility. In a nutshell, she's a doctor, a professor, an author, a research scientist. And today we're super excited to jump into the topic of how Persian spices might actually be beneficial to your health and well-being. And if I could pass the buck now to you, Mahtab June, give us your sort of 10-second overview of what you're currently doing.
First of all, thank you for inviting me to be in your podcast. I feel honored too. And let's see, my 10-second introduction. I'm a professor of pharmaceutical sciences at the University of California in Irvine, and I am also a researcher, scientist, as you mentioned. I have a basic science lab and I work with fruit flies, and I have been testing the impact of dietary supplements and botanical extracts on their lifespan and health span for the past 17 years. And you may wonder why fruit flies, because believe it or not, we share 75% of our disease genes with flies. So flies are kind of, I like to think of them as a mini version of us. Humans.
Wow. Hi, Bita June.
Hi, Bita June. Hi, Dr. Mahtab June. Thank you so much for coming on the show. This is a great topic for us to be discussing because I think that as we are at the beginning of this year and coming out of a pandemic, hopefully, there has been a lot of attention of taking care of ourselves and making sure that we are healthy and happy and have also the resources that we can use to make sure that we're taken care of at this kind of really precious time. So thank you for coming onto the show and hopefully teaching us some of these really cool things about some of these spices that we're going to get into.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to our chat.
Yeah, so Dr. Mahtab June and I share some common philosophies. Basically, my late father was a physician, and he taught me and preached how you can get pretty much all that you need from food and from your nutrition. As long as you don't have a deficiency and a need for something, you pretty much should be able to stay healthy by choosing the right foods. And what would you say are some of the top spices in Persian food that might be attributable in terms of having medicinal properties or being like good for our health?
I share your philosophy, and as you know, I have always been a big fan of your father's philosophy when it came to patient care and the importance of nutrition. And as you mentioned, we can get practically everything that we need when it comes to vitamins and minerals from our food sources, if we choose them wisely, of course. And in case of deficiencies, yes, we definitely need to supplement and we need to address those deficiencies. Persian food and Persian cuisine is so rich when it comes to the spices and the plants and the herbs that we use in the cuisine that we probably need hours and hours to talk about all those spices. Mm-hmm. And in spite of what most of us think that these spices are added to the food for mostly taste and color or, fragrant, these spices also have medicinal properties. And I am starting to think that some of these spices are chosen for a very specific reason, and that's the health reason. We didn't have the science that we have right now, 100 years ago, when we added cinnamon or saffron or rose water to our food. But we now have some very, I would say, preliminary, because the clinical data is not there yet, or in some cases, not very comprehensive. But we do have some data suggesting that these spices have medicinal properties. Let's see. How about if we start with the most expensive one?
Let's do it.
Which is saffron. So saffron is a spice that comes from the stigmas of Crocus sativus, which is a plant from Iris family. It is very hard, of course, to make the spice because you need 4,500 flowers to make 1 ounce of saffron. That's why it's the most expensive spice in the world. But saffron, in addition to having a beautiful color that we all enjoy when we add it to our rice and Tadiq and everything else, it has medicinal properties. And we have in vitro studies, and in vitro means a study that was done in a test tube. So it wasn't done in animals or in humans, it was done in test tubes. So based on those studies, saffron appears to have anti-cancer properties. So the anti-cancer properties of saffron is under investigation when it comes to humans and clinical research. But when it comes to other medicinal properties of saffron, such as its impact on our mood and making us happy, working as an anti-anxiety or antidepressive spice, we do have some clinical data.
Wow.
And if you look at the clinical studies, they were all done in Iran. And a study recently looked at all these studies, all 8 of them, that look at patients with depression. And they even compare saffron to drugs like Prozac, fluoxetine, or imipramine. And they showed that saffron at the right dose works as well as these drugs. So are we going to now jump up and down and start taking lots of saffron? I can't really make a comment on that because these studies are very small, but they're very promising.
It probably makes sense why we get so happy when we get a piece of Tadiq too.
Yes, Peter June, I was going to exactly say that because I don't know about you, but in my family, we are always fighting over Tadiq, especially if it's oversaturated with saffron.
Absolutely.
Finally, my mom and I came up with a method to make more Tadiq than rice.
Wow.
I recently learned that there is a thing called saffron tea.
Yes, something that is in like a powder form, saffron instant beverage powder. So I'm not sure. We'll have to take a very close look, us health nutrition people, and see if all of the ingredients are acceptable.
Maybe I can test it in my HPLC machine in the lab because saffron has 150 compounds in it.
Oh, wow.
So a high quality saffron needs to have those 150 compounds. And these compounds include some antioxidants, vitamins. So I'll be happy to test your tea in my lab.
Excellent.
Okay, great.
Okay, well, that's really interesting to know about that.
Yeah, in these traditions in Iran, I have heard that in some villages, that is almost a ceremony to have a saffron tea for the groom's family, when they visit the bride's family. And maybe they don't know that scientifically this is a very, very good practice because everybody is going to be happy.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
Here we go. Great. Well, that's a beautiful tradition. I love that.
Well, the spice that comes to mind that you see everywhere in terms of marketing, and I don't know whether it's pseudoscience or not, is turmeric.
So actually, turmeric is a spice that I tested in my lab. So I used what we call the main bioactive compound in turmeric, which is curcumin. So we tested curcumin on my fruit flies, and it increased their lifespan. And it worked on pathways in flies that we share with them that would increase longevity. So what was interesting about testing turmeric or curcumin in the flies was that I was working on my project and by accident, I met a Korean scientist in a conference, and he told me that he was doing exactly the same thing that I was doing at the time. So he and I joined forces, and we published just one paper, and we reported lifespan extension properties with turmeric. And we also shared our data, our mechanistic data that were quite similar. And to me, this is the best type of science because it's replicated, two different scientists in two different countries, coming up with the same results in different labs. But turmeric has many other medicinal properties, and it has been under investigation for, decades when it comes to anti-cancer and anti-inflammatory properties. And there are lots of issues with using turmeric in these studies because having the right dose and the formulation is always very challenging. But I have to say that the basic science and also the clinical studies are very promising. And turmeric is something that we use a lot in Persian cuisine.
Yeah, I mean, turmeric is basically the foundation of almost every Persian dish, I feel, starting with the sauteing of the onions and adding the turmeric to it. So I think that traditionally, the forms of turmeric that I've used cooking Persian food is more of the dried, ground version. And then I do love starting my day off with like a little tea of sorts of little ground turmeric, but I also put a little bit of black pepper in there to activate the turmeric. I think they need to work together, but I love starting my day out like that. And I definitely am curious would a fresh turmeric be more potent or more effective than a dried ground form?
When it comes to food, if you are using turmeric, obviously for flavor and color, it is much easier to use the powder. And that's what we all do. But I always recommend fresh turmeric. The problem is that I have been trying to find out if the plant gets oxidized as soon as it's exposed to air. But I think we consume it fast enough so that that's not an issue. So yes, if you're using turmeric in your tea or in your smoothie, if you can just peel the root and just use it fresh, obviously it's much better. But as far as if you get any medicinal benefit from that small amount of turmeric that you're putting in your tea, we don't really have any clinical studies to show that that actually works. But when it comes to taking the supplements, there are some studies suggesting that turmeric can have anti-inflammatory properties. The only problem is that the quality of the supplements are obviously, as you know, are always under scrutiny and question. So finding the right quality supplement is very important. And based on the studies that we have, the data is not that conclusive. I think it's very promising because I have family members who have mild case of arthritis, and they tell me that when they stop taking their turmeric, the pain is back.
That's interesting. I wonder if that has anything with it being a root. You know how some people take ginger for arthritis pain. I like to use it in tahine. We talk about tahine a lot. What food would you put it in, Mahtab June, in a Persian food?
I have to confess that I do not use a lot of turmeric. I use it very gingerly in various soups. In one of my favorite Persian food, adas polo, I use turmeric. I prefer to use saffron. And as you know, many of us mix saffron and turmeric when it comes to adding spices to our food.
Absolutely. I do. In tahine, I mix it. And they both give the color in terms of aesthetics.
Yeah.
Well, we can't talk about Persian spices without mentioning cinnamon. How do you feel about cinnamon, ladies?
Cozy, warming spice. It's beautiful. It's unlike any other. When you add cinnamon to a dish, it definitely, makes an impact. So you definitely can tell that there's cinnamon typically in it. I do love using it. I think I've mentioned this before as kind of like a secret ingredient. Sometimes I'll add just a tiny bit to a dish, to a Persian dish, and I think it just adds a really comforting effect to it. You can't really taste it, but typically when you add cinnamon to a dish, you can definitely tell that there's cinnamon. Immediately, like halim comes to mind, where it has like a warm sugar and cinnamon topping with some melted butter.
What's unique about cinnamon in Persian cuisine is we often use it in savory foods and dishes, whereas I think in Western recipes, it's more of a dessert spice because it has a sweet essence, but it definitely sets us apart when we use it in our more savory. But now that we have you, Dr. Mahtab June, what would you say are some of the health benefits, if any?
So I agree with what Vita June said. Cinnamon just adds, I don't know, it adds something to any kind of food, whether it's savory, sweet, you name it, that sometimes it's not undetectable. You just know that it tastes good. I also tested cinnamon in my lab in our fruit flies. And once again, cinnamon extended the lifespan of my fruit flies, and it
Wow.
also improved their health span. I just have to say something because I don't want your audience think that every time I give something to my fruit flies, it extends their lifespan. We have been we have been doing research for the past 17 years on various botanical extracts and dietary supplements and some pharmaceuticals. And we have tested about 150 compounds. And from these 150, only 5 prove to increase lifespan and improve health span at the same time. So I don't want your audience to think that every time I give something to my fruit flies, it works. But cinnamon
Absolutely.
is one of them. So cinnamon is one of these 5 compounds or botanical extracts that worked. And it increased the lifespan. And we try to figure out if the increase in lifespan is related to insulin and glucose metabolism and homeostasis, because you may have heard that cinnamon is under investigation to be used in patients with diabetes and also pre-diabetes. And we were not able to find a link, but there are studies showing that cinnamon increases the transport of sugar in our blood or glucose back into the cell. So again, the data is very promising in the use of cinnamon when it comes to sugar homeostasis. But my story with cinnamon goes back to Iran when my grandmother used to force me to take a tablespoonful of cinnamon in cold wintry days in Tehran. And I used to like scream and not wanting to take it. And she would say that, believe me, this is good for you. This is going to keep you warm. And I was thinking that, well, my grandmother absolutely doesn't know anything what she's talking about. And just to make her happy, I would swallow that really bitter tablespoon of cinnamon. And it was decades later that I learned in my own lab that cinnamon has thermogenic properties. Cinnamon can actually
Wow.
keep us warm.
No way.
And this is one of the reasons that you may find on internet that cinnamon is not being studied for weight loss or obesity. And I can't really comment on that because, again, I would like to say that the data is not very conclusive. But
Safe answer.
yeah, exactly. This is my safe answer. But it was amazing that decades ago, my grandmother, who was not a scientist, knew that cinnamon can increase body temperature during those cold winters in Tehran.
Wow.
I love that story. Those stories are the best.
Yes, they are.
You know, you mentioned adaspalo. That's another dish that I love having cinnamon in. The adaspalo is the lentil rice, and a lot of times we have it garnished with caramelized onions and raisins and dates. And within that, the cinnamon really adds so much to it. So it seems like adaspalo is going to be a dish that we can add a lot of these flavors to get a lot of health benefits.
Yes, it is one of my favorite foods too.
Yay. And, you know, as we're getting closer to Valentine's Day, which is coming right up, let's go ahead and talk about rose. So rose, more than just a flower, but, you know, in Persian cuisine, we love using edible dried rose petals for garnishes and within food. So this is kind of like new news to me that that would have any medicinal properties.
Your audience cannot see me, but I'm smiling, as you can see on the screen, because Rosa damascena is another plant extract that I work with in my lab. And it was one of those 5 botanical extracts that work really well, that increase the lifespan of our flies. And we also did some mechanistic studies to figure out why it had such an impact. So rose is very close to my heart because I've been working with rose species for quite some time. And when I started doing this study, I collaborated with a scientist in Iran, and he sent me these rose petals that he himself had grown in his garden. So I started working with the rose from Iran, and I fell in love. And what we showed again was increase in lifespan. So I started doing a little bit more research to find out what are some other medicinal properties of rose. Rose is the flower, spice, or fragrance of love. So happy Valentine's Day to everyone. And it has medicinal properties. We have some very interesting studies showing that rose oil, when we just smell it, I'm not talking about ingesting it, I'm talking about just smelling it, can improve our mood. So there are now some studies suggesting that just smelling the rose oil can decrease the signs of anxiety. There are some studies ongoing on evaluating the impact of rose petals and rose oil and rose extract on mild depressive symptoms. And going back again to some of our grandmother stories, I remember that in Iran, during funerals and sad events, I would see the friends of my grandma picking something from their little purse and smell it. And I had no idea what it was. And I learned later that they were smelling a very concentrated extract of a rose oil that was in those tiny little bottles in their purses. So when they felt sad and they felt like they were about to have an anxiety attack or I don't know what, they would smell it.
Wow.
And now we have data, science suggesting that maybe that is a possibility.
I believe it. Aromas can be really mood lifting to me.
Yeah.
The rose flavor can be polarizing. I personally am one who loves it. I have been working on these Yazdi cupcakes. The other thing I like to use rose petals in is any kind of layered rice. It also adds aesthetic beauty to put them as a garnish. But there's something special about the rose petals from Iran.
Yes.
Both in flavor and appearance. They're really special. And it sounds like in medicinal quality.
And I love it that when you give someone a rose, it has so many other benefits. Not only does it look beautiful, but the smell is lovely and it helps with your anxiety. And if you ingest it, it's good for you too. So it's more than just a flower. This is like a amazing thing that when we share with other people, it's beautiful.
This is what I call a secret from my lab because we haven't studied this yet. But when we were working with rose, I noticed that fruit flies that were not consuming the rose extract, the Rosa damascena extract, were also living longer. The control group that was not consuming the rose, they were living longer. And I finally figure out why. They were living longer because they were smelling the rose from the fly box or the cage next to them. And if you would remove that box and put it in another room, when these control flies who were not fed Rosa damascena, they wouldn't live longer. So it was very interesting.
Oh my God.
Ah, yes, it's like mind-blowing science facts. I love it.
So that's why we are told that you need to stop and smell the roses.
Wow.
And not just look at them or eat them.
I love it.
That's so sweet.
More excuses for me to get fresh flowers, fresh roses around me all the time.
Totally.
Hope someone's listening.
Dr. Mahtab June, thank you so much for joining us. Bita June, as always, is lovely to chat with you. Today, we've gotten to hear about the amazing, decadent saffron, turmeric, cinnamon, and rose. We're so happy to have you with us. Thank you so much.
Dr. Mahtab June, can you just tell us some of the projects you're working on or where people can get more information about you?
Sure. I mean, you can easily find me on internet. I'm a professor at UCI and all my contact information is pretty public. So if you go on uci.edu or if you Google my name, Mahtab Jafari, you will find my lab website, my publications, and also the book. One thing that I would like to emphasize on is that when it comes to taking dietary supplements and vitamins and minerals, I think food sources are the best source. It is very challenging to find high quality supplements, and it is also very challenging to know the right dose and the right amount. But if we all eat a very healthy and whole food diet, the chances of needing any supplements is pretty slim. And this is why I wrote that book, to really educate our public about the safe use of dietary supplements.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, and that's great to know. You know, as we touched on earlier too, Persian food is so rich in the greens and the balance of the different types of food. Persian food is not only delicious, but it's super nutritious for you and apparently lifts your spirits as well.
I can't agree more. Persian food is truly nutritious and healthy.
Thank you, ladies. Such a pleasure.
Yes, same here. Thank you so much for having me on your show.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. You've been listening to the Modern Persian Food Podcast with Bita and Bita. Thanks for spending time with us. If you've enjoyed what you heard today, consider telling a friend or giving us a good rating. You can subscribe to our show for free on your favorite podcasting app or find us online at modernpersianfood.com or on Instagram for the recipes and information we talked about today. We'd love to hear your thoughts and see you next time.